I'd like to start by asking you, Nicole, to answer a very broad question, which is really, what is executive search?
Executive search is when a client engages a consultant for a very specific strategy or a specific project or task to fill a vacancy. So usually it is a C-suite role, a leadership role, or a challenging position that they would like to outsource to an expert to put together a strategy on how to find that particular talent. And that executive search consultant is engaged exclusively for that task. So they take on a job brief, they take on an advisory role, they might have input in terms of the structure, the job description, talking about where to find that talent. And they essentially then go into the market to find where are we going to source this person and how do we get access to them to find the client the best available candidate in the market. So executive search is quite different to traditional recruitment, which in our industry, sometimes we can talk about that being contingent recruitment. Contingent essentially means that it's contingent on whether the success is contingent on whether the consultant can fill the role with the right candidate or not. So it tends to be more volume, greater competition. It might have more than one consultant working on the vacancy. And it tends to be that you're competing on speed rather than quality, because it's about which consultant can fill the job the fastest and then hence get paid. So in executive search, quite the opposite. The consultant is engaged exclusively. They're getting paid up front and they have that task of sourcing the right person for that role. And it's usually in a proactive manner in terms of going into the market and finding the talent, rather than a traditional recruitment strategy, which may involve putting up an advertisement and waiting for candidates to apply. So it's quite a different proposition in terms of how talent is sourced. And from a candidate's perspective, it's quite a different experience, because the consultant is definitely well advised in terms of the company, the structure, the culture, and you'll probably find that you'll get a lot more information and a greater time and assessment from the consultant than perhaps with a traditional recruitment exercise, where you might just be asked to submit a CV and it might feel a little less personal and maybe not the same level of service. So that would just be my quick snapshot, Patrick. I'm sure there's other people on the panel who would like to have a say on this, but that would be my overview.
There are companies, including multinational firms, Indian firms, and some of the small startups, who resort to executive search process being conducted in-house. Now, typically what happens is that the mandate may come from the board or it may come from the CEO. But ideally, the process will be by and large similar to what a search firm will run in terms of the steps. In terms of identifying the search domain from where the candidates will come, how the interview process will happen. So these are all structured, even if the process is in-house, the process needs to be standardized. But possibly, depending on the company, the rigor may vary. So that's one difference I can think of. Also, typically when a search firm is working on a mandate, what they will say is that these are the companies from where we are going to source. These are the direct competition, related industries and companies. But there is some other, which are the outliers, where we try to identify people based on certain characteristics or the DNA of the candidate. Now, typically that part, which may be between 5 to 8%, may be missing when a company does this search in-house, because they will go by the traditional method of identifying people either from their network, but this is the rigor that possibly can be missing. So that's, and also at times, very senior people may be wary of responding to a company's call in terms of inviting them for a meeting. So, so these are some of the drawbacks, but there are successful cases. I know quite a lot where the hiring has happened without the help of a search partner.
Well, that's interesting, but I do think when it comes to those very senior positions and those strategic roles, companies will still go to an executive search firm for that independence and confidentiality that you talk about. Sonal, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, it's the same point that you just made. It's the lack of bias and the access to a much larger network and the ability to have quite an honest conversation with candidates about the pros and cons of the company that you're hiring for, that people will use executive search firms for. So clearly, it's a wider and a deeper process.
Great, thank you. And while you've got the microphone, Sonal, perhaps you can tell me, how can a candidate tell if their executive search firm they're working with is following professional standards and working to a high level of quality? Because I guess there's relatively few barriers to entry to executive search.
So anybody with a phone and an internet connection can basically set up to become an executive search firm in most countries. So there are no true barriers to entry. So this is my plug for the AESC. Of course, if you are an AESC member, chances are you've been certified and verified in terms of quality standards, as well as the way you work and the processes that you follow. So that's number one. The second piece I would say is look at the firms. I mean, check them out as you might any employer. Look at how visible they are, what their website looks like, what they say about themselves on LinkedIn, what the profiles of the people are, are they visible in media? Do they get called on to comment on industry issues? Ask for references from other people that you know in the industry. If they're well recommended, they've had a good experience. And I think most important, choose the right firms to target, because if you're a mid-level executive reaching out to quite a high-level search firm, chances are they're not going to respond because it's not their wheelhouse. If there are companies that are doing, let's say, a lot of work in technology or startups, and that's what you do, it might be a good idea to target them rather than a generalist firm. So horses for courses. So biggest is not the best, but you do need a certain size and a certain background to be credible.
Great, thank you. And Nairuz, if I could jump to you, what do you think are some of the common misconceptions that candidates have about executive search?
Well, unfortunately, there are many misconceptions about executive search, but I will try to summarize, the top ones. So, and various myths, I would say. So myth number one is anyone can execute an executive search by using a job board. And that's totally not true. So when you're recruiting for C-suite position, the best fit candidates are not usually found on the job market. It's actually exactly the opposite. Like usually those individuals are typically high quality professionals that are currently employed by another company, happily and satisfied where they are, very successful. And those are the ones that we call the hidden gems. And these are the ones that we would be proactively reaching out to, explaining to them the opportunity, creating an interest, engaging into a conversation. So it's not that easy in terms of posting a job and an applicant applying for a job. It requires much more, especially because the target level of seniority that executive search target, it's much more senior, and hence it requires much more than a simple approach. Another myth is that executive search firms are pricey and provide low return on investment. And reality is, by choosing the right executive search partner, your provider will present a suite of finalists, often paired with the behavior, predictive performance assessment, leadership attributes. It's way beyond, the quick fit, if you will, between a JD and a resume. So these data can prove to be a critical indicator of the candidates that will align best with both the role and the organization as a whole. Another myth is that internal talent acquisition teams can produce the same caliber candidates as executive search firms. And this is a growing misconception, I have to say. Ultimately, the answer really lies in the complexity of the search, as well as the confidentiality. In addition to that, strong executives would feel more comfortable with a neutral third-party professional expert executive search professional. And what we always say whenever we're engaging with a candidate, with an executive, we always say that this conversation is to build the path of our engagement together, not only for this opportunity, but for the future in general. So I might be engaging with Patrick, for example, for a certain conversation, and throughout the conversation we discover that this role may not be the right fit for you, but a couple of weeks later we might engage in another search, and I would remember what Patrick can brings on to the table in terms of his unique characteristic. And that will be, the time when we will engage into another conversation. So what I'm trying to say, the relationship with the search professional, it's not transactional. It's a long-term process. It's an engagement and partnership. So that's another part that's very important to share in terms of the differentiative elements of executive search. Another one that I would like to mention, again, touching on what my colleague has explained already earlier, that contingent search firms offers the same value as return search firm. And the contingent firms versus retained search firms, they operate on two different models. And the contingent firms usually provide a very quick and mass production kind of interaction. So a contingent consultant would be having much higher volume in terms of roles that they're working on at a certain time. And they will be very much under time pressure in terms of the quick turnaround. So if I'm a contingent consultant, I might have, 20 or 30 open roles that I'm handling at a given time, and it's kind of a gambling game. We'll put that ad, we'll see what we can get, and then the quickest that I can close, that will get my attention, and then I'll move on. With executive search firm, there is a commitment from day one, from both parties, from the client, from the search professional. So we are committed to allocate our time and be dedicated to be working on that specific search assignment that we get from our client. And we do not stop until we have 100% searched the market, targeted all the target companies that we have agreed upon, and fulfilled that part. And this is sometimes can be perceived wrongly, because also one point that I wanted to mention, that with contingent, sometimes the turnaround can be quick, but with executive search, it's more lengthy and thorough process. And that doesn't mean that things are not happening. So sometimes what's important to share with the candidates that the process takes longer time, simply because it's very thorough and we dig really deep in the whole aspects of it. So be patient, and by the end of the day, we will not stop until we conclude and find the best fit for the role.
Great, thank you, Nowruz. It's a comprehensive list there, and I definitely get the impression that that executive search consultants are working really as trusted advisors to solve organizational challenges, really, and the key way to do that is through the recruitment of high caliber talent. Sonal, did you have a quick comment?
I did. I think from a candidate perspective, the one misconception might be that we work on behalf of the candidates. Now, that is partly true. We're obviously representing candidates and giving them good advice. But I think the one thing to remember is that we work for the company, we work for the client who engages us, and everything that we do is funneled towards fulfilling that role rather than placing you. And that's an important thing to remember when you're engaging with us.
Yeah, that's an important point. So I want to move on, and really time's ticking. So I